Another question from this city: how do the experiences in your CE5 contacts in your video before the break differ from the man-made Lockheed Martin experiences? Well, again, the man-made devices have a machine feel. And I'm going to go here into another thing that's going to be, we could talk all night about. The ET craft, the people who got to the Roswell crash, or the man I know who got to the original crash that happened in the Andes on the Bolivian-Peruvian border in 1992, one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, every single one of the people I know who've been at these sites have said that the craft themselves were trying to heal themselves. And they are living, conscious nano-bio machines. What do I mean? The spacecraft themselves, aside from being seamless and having an energy that is very transdimensional, are conscious and living, and they're conscious to the point of AI, artificial intelligence, to the point you can feel that the craft itself is transmitting and has the consciousness of the pilot or the occupants. How many people have had that experience? I bet a few have. So that is very different from a machine made by Lockheed and Northrop or what have you. And so there are certain hallmarks like that that is quite obvious, especially on a close encounter or close approach, versus the man-made ones. The man-made ones feel like a man-made machine, and they are. And they're not nearly as sophisticated as the bio-nano conscious ET craft, which are themselves conscious. Now I want to say something about that also. Some of these civilizations are so far advanced that the spacecraft themselves contain the full consciousness of the occupants, up to and including cosmic consciousness and God consciousness. They're amazing. Yeah, those encounters are beautiful. We don't have time to go through it. Now, here's a question from Huntington Beach. Does group contact also serve to download higher consciousness into collective human consciousness to accelerate the rate of awakening? Yes, there is a power to doing this. You know, there's a saying, God loves those who work together. There is an enormous power to people doing this in a group. Now, I'm not saying you can't do this by yourself, but if you do it in a group, and I'm not a huge group, but you know, 3 to 8 people is enough. There is a coherence that happens, and like Dr. John found at Princeton, it's an exponential growth. But now imagine if we begin to organize thousands of people in thousands of teams all over the world doing this, the shift it can have in global consciousness, even by people who don't know what we're doing. Because it will affect literally every atom and subatomic particle on Earth. That's the power of higher consciousness. We have a question. Can you speak to the common knowledge among indigenous people of multidimensional beings? I began having contact experience in my teens with those from the Pleiades, who I later found out my tribe descends from. Very good question. Actually, the native peoples that I've met with, and a lot of the chiefs have told me that they view them as star people. But I have a quarter Cherokee Indian through my father, and an eighth of Catawba Indian through my mother. And I know that amongst the Cherokee, they felt that they were from peoples from the Pleiades. Now, I think probably what actually happened, it's not like all these different tribes on Earth came literally from another star system, but they had contact with beings from those star systems that gave them knowledge and insight. The Dogon tribe in Africa has an account, actually had a star chart that identified that Sirius was actually 2 stars, Sirius A and B, et cetera, and so on. Many of you know this. And so the native peoples, when you go around the world, you will find that there is in their tradition, although they tend not to speak of it for fear of ridicule, about the fact that they have had contact with these civilizations. It is my own sense that every culture in ancient times up through modern times have had contact experiences that have informed their society. And if you look at even in the Middle Age, I think the 1400s, there was a a painting. It's on our website, and I've seen the real one actually. That's in Italy, of Mary, Mother Mary, holding baby Jesus. She has a star on her left shoulder, and above her is a ship that looks exactly like the craft that we saw in Florida, in Pensacola, exactly, with a beam of bluish light coming down with people underneath it looking up like this. And that's been authenticated. That is something from the 1400s. So if you go through the history of the human race, Native peoples, Western cultures, Celtic societies, all have had some sort of contact that has informed their myths and their traditions. Now, many times the meaning of it gets distorted over time, but it certainly has happened. And most Native peoples, if you talk to their elders, they know this. Certainly the Hopis, the Cherokee, others. Another one from the Dominican Republic. Once you have made contact, what do you do with that information, and what is the key message for humanity behind all this? Very good question. You know, there's a wonderful saying, the wise are they who speak not, unless they have a hearer. So there are a lot of things we can experience that we have to use, common sense as to what we share it with. But I think to the extent that we can share things with people who are open to the knowledge, it's very important, because ultimately, to make this subject real, we need to have a lot of people understand what its implications are. And the implications are enormous for the human future. And I recommend that everyone think about, when you have an experience, that who it is that you can share this with, that you feel safe in doing so. But also to think about what it is that you should say to people who may not be wanting to hear the high strangeness part of this. And that's why we put together the disclosure book, the DVDs that we have a 2-hour and a 4-hour DVD that has all these military witnesses, documents, etc., photos, because some people really need to start at where they are. Everyone does. You don't want to speak past people. But I think it's to the extent that you can speak of these experiences with like-minded and open-minded people, it will spread the knowledge person to person very, very quickly. But the real message the ETs are sending through the CE5 contact, the meta message, in my opinion, is that we are ready and we're waiting for you to be ready. So if we show them we're ready for contact by doing something intelligent, without prejudice, that's looking into the future in a beautiful way, they're going to respond in ways that are really almost magically beautiful. But they're waiting for us to make that initiative, because we're the children of Earth. They just don't want to come here and obviously, disrupt things. I mean, could they come to Earth, shut down all military systems, and impose some sort of new world here? Yeah, sure. It'd be about as successful as us trying to put in a Jeffersonian democracy in Afghanistan. Okay, so look, if we figure this out, they have. They're wiser than that. It has to come through us. We're the children of Earth. One question from Bakersfield: any evidence that the transdimensional ETs are us from our future who have physically and spiritually evolved? Yes and no. Most are interstellars that have originated and evolved from other star systems. But there are experiences that are exactly what this gentleman is asking, to wit. Everybody heard of the Rendlesham Forest Mintwaters case? Famous landing event at a secret nuclear facility in England in '81, I believe. We have a number of Disclosure Project witnesses. And a craft came down. It was shaped like a pyramid, broke some branches as it came down, left physical traces. The Ministry of Defense in Great Britain eventually released them. Lord Hill Norton, who I met with and spent some time with, who had been Minister of Defense, was appalled that he was lied to about all these things when he was in those positions. But what the story you haven't heard is that some of the officers I've gotten to know who don't want to go on the record saying this for fear of ridicule, related that when on one particular night, now this happened over many, many days, a month or two, but on this one particular night an object landed and they went out and it was a perfect pyramid. So 4 triangular sides and a square base, right? A tetrahedron is 3 triangular sides and a triangular base. A lot of people confuse the two. The pyramid landed and out through, it was like black onyx. It was like glass black, but kind of translucent. And out was a very tall, luminous light beam that floated through the side of the craft and communicated with the officers and said, "We are you from the future. We are your descendants from 500,000 years in the future. And if you don't stop what you're doing here, we won't be." And it was a warning about the nuclearization of the planet and the risks of mutual assured destruction and global holocaust. And people say, what? It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. So on the one hand, they were ETs, but they were us. They were ETs that had been humans, that had gone through 500,000 years of conscious evolution to where those who are the descendants of us on Earth had become extraterrestrials. And that's what landed at Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters. Get it? Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, okay. A lot of people go, what? Yeah, we could spend 2 months and I wouldn't exhaust this information about what that means. Someone from Seattle, will you talk a little more about the depth of multi-dimensional layers? A really good question. We tried to organize these in sort of insightful questions. So when you talk about, everybody remember the old radios that had you could turn them on a knob and you could, sometimes you'd hear one station and sometimes you'd hear another station in Chicago. And if you got it just right, you could hear both stations. Okay, that's what we're talking about. You can have these technologies to where the transdimensional physics would be that they can be here in this time and place and simultaneously be in another dimension or another time or another place. Because you can dissociate time from space. And this gets too complex to go into in terms of the physics of it. But time can be dissociated from 3D space, and transdimensional physics allow, for example, a craft to be over Los Angeles, simultaneously be out in another star system, and also the same craft and beings be outside Seattle. That happened during the Northridge earthquake. The famous actor Burl Ives, who was, had on a hot tin roof and was friends with Elizabeth Taylor. I was at his home, and his wife told me during the Northridge earthquake, she had an ET experience after I had taught her these protocols. And she was up in Anacortes, north of Seattle, and this craft, early in the morning, wee hours, was hovering over her driveway, and a blue beam, sort of light, was coming into her foyer, and there was a thought being transmitted to her that said, "Do not be concerned, do not be afraid, we are always with you, you will be safe." She picked up the phone and intuitively knew to call her best friend who lived in Los Angeles. At that instant, that woman was in the throes of the Northridge earthquake with her house shaking, saying, "Dorothy, you wouldn't believe what's going on. There's a terrible earthquake going on, but there's this craft." And she described precisely the same craft and the same message streaming from this transdimensional light. And she was getting the same words over and over again. "Do not be afraid, we are always with you," etc., and so on. And Dorothy asked me, was that the same craft in two places? I said, yes, it's called bilocation. You can bilocate, trilocate, quadrilocate. So when you begin to understand the plasticity of space-time and how much it's linked into consciousness and the science of consciousness and the realms of astral energy, but there are interfaces where the world of thought and consciousness begins to resonate into finer and finer connections into the structure of space-time. And so space-time becomes flexible. Not only can you bend it, but but you can cause objects to appear in multiple places at once.